Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you. My name's Rocky. I'm an alcoholic. Um, very nice to be here. This is awesome to be on a meeting like this with so many people from all around the country and outside of the United States. I've gotten a healthy dose of Zoom meetings over the last 5 weeks or so, but not my preferred method of participating in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I've really come to enjoy it, and to see this many people from so many different places is really awesome. So thank you for having me here. It's always an honor to be able to speak in any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I didn't introduce myself as being the first time member to this group, because I figured I would get that out of the way here. This is my first time here. I do have a birthday coming up in the month of May. On the 14th will be 8 years. So God willing, I'll make it there, and I'll be able to say that I've been continuously sober for 8 years. So I'll get a couple things out of the way up front. One of them is my sobriety date, which is May 14th, 2012. It's my first sobriety date. It wasn't my first attempt at cutting back or eliminating drinking or drugs from my life, but it was the first time that I ever stepped foot into a meeting and asked for help, and took some action towards that. And I've been continuously sober ever since. So I have a sobriety date. I have a sponsor. He's been my sponsor for 7.5 years, and I stay in regular contact with him. I've worked the steps. I've taken other men through the steps. I try to be of service to Alcoholics Anonymous as much as I can. I'm very involved here in Concord and Contra Costa County with H&I, taking meetings into detox centers and homeless shelters and jails, and that's a big part of my sobriety and my recovery. So I only say that to get it out of the way, because I may forget some of that stuff, because I usually don't have any idea what I'm going to talk about. And considering everything that's gone on in my life in the last month, this might go a completely different direction. So I just want to say that stuff up front, because I think it's important to, especially if there's anybody that's new, that I always share that I do a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't just show up at meetings and think that this is going to work. I have to do a lot. I have to work with a sponsor. I have to take the steps into my life. I have to be of service. And if I don't do all those things, my life tends to get off track. And so I'll start with what it was like. So I started drinking at a young age. I started drinking when I was 11. I grew up in a household with 3 brothers, 2 older brothers, 1 younger brother. And, I was in the type of household where alcohol was always around. My parents drank, my grandparents drank, my aunts and uncles and cousins and friends, everybody drank. And I was the type of kid that, being the third of 4 boys, I always wanted to be like my older brothers. I always wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like the older kids. And so I was always kind of infatuated with alcohol. Every time my parents would get together and have parties at the house and they would all start drinking and have a great time, it looked awesome to me. It looked intriguing to me. So I was infatuated with alcohol at a very young age. I can remember, our book talks about having a mental obsession and a physical allergy, right? And when I think about the mental obsession with alcohol, I can remember like it was yesterday, the very first time that I consciously took a drink on my own. I don't think it was the first drink I ever took in my life, because my parents were the type of people that would put a little brandy in the bottle just to keep the kids quiet, that kind of family, So I probably had a few drinks well before I knew it, but I remember being around 11 years old, and I wanted to drink, and I went out into the garage where my dad kept a stockpile of Coors Lights. And I can remember going out into the garage, and the light from the garage, the refrigerator, when I opened it up, and the sound of me cracking that beer open, and the way that it tasted and hit the back of my throat. And, I didn't even get drunk. It's not even the first time I got drunk, but I could remember like it was yesterday, that feeling of doing that. I'm infatuated with alcohol. I have a mental obsession with alcohol. And, growing up, I had 3 brothers, and we were a sports family. We played sports year round, and baseball, basketball, football, soccer, swim team. And I always wanted to be like the starting pitcher or the starting quarterback. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I always wanted to be like Joe Montana or Jose Canseco, and I wasn't that. I was a little chubby kid that, batted ninth and played right field, even though my dad was the coach. You know what I mean? That's the kind of athlete I was. And so I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I had two brothers that were amazing athletes, and they were always like all-stars year after year, and that's what I wanted to be. And I was not that. And I always just had this feeling like I wasn't good enough, and always comparing myself to other people and what I thought I should be like. And I could remember, that first time that I got drunk, I was 11 years old. My older brother was in high school. He had a party at the house, had a bunch of his friends over, and I wanted to be like the older kids. And so I was hanging out, even though I wasn't supposed to be. And I talked them into giving me one of those red Solo cups and filling it up halfway. And they played this game with me. They told me that they'd fill it up halfway, and if I drank the whole thing in one sip, they wouldn't tell my brother, right? Because I knew that if my brother found out, he was going to smack me around. So I drank the whole thing. They thought it was great. Then they filled it up all the way, and they told me that if I didn't drink the whole thing, they're going to tell my brother. So I drank that one, and then I drank another one, and before you know it, just like magic, little 11-year-old fat kid running around a high school party thinking it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. For about 45 minutes, it was the greatest night of my life. I had a great time, and everybody thought it was hilarious. I thought I was the king of the world. All that fear and insecurity and wanting to, not feeling like I'm good enough, all that stuff went completely out the window. And then in very short order, the room started spinning and I started throwing up, and it was a mess after that. But I remember waking up the next day and feeling like it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Like something happened inside of me that was just like, man, that's it. I love it, And very soon after that, I don't know if it was the next day or sometime around that time in my life, my older brother's friends got me stoned and took me to IHOP. And so you can imagine for an 11-year-old fat kid to get stoned and go to IHOP, that was something that appealed to me as well. And I fell in love with that. Now, that's all I'll say about that. It's Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'll just say that at a young age, I fell in love with the idea that I could put something in my body and it would change the way that I feel, and I was hooked. And I chased that from the time I was 11 until the time I was 30 years old. So it started then, I started hanging around with people that were like me, people that wanted to get loaded as much as they could, as often as they could. And that's the type of people I wanted to be around. And that's the type of person I was. And so it escalated from there. Our book talks about the fact that this is a progressive disease, and my alcoholism definitely progressed. It started with just wanting to hang out and drink. Here's the thing is I always drank for the effect produced by alcohol. I always drank to get loaded. I never had a social drink in my entire life. And I know that because nobody drinks Goldschlager straight out of the bottle and chases it with Old English malt liquor just to relax and unwind after a long, hard day of 7th grade, But that's the way that I drank in 7th grade. That's the way that I drank in high school. That's the way I drank in my 20s. I always drank for the effect, and I drank to get loaded. And I always drank more than the people around me. And I didn't know what that was, but I even used to explain it to my friends back then. It's like, once I started drinking, I'm like a Mack truck with 2 gas pedals and no brakes. And I just go, 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 go. And I don't know how to stop myself. And I knew that at a young age. I didn't know that was alcoholism, right? I didn't know that I had this physical allergy that once I put something in my body, I can't control what the outcome's going to be. I didn't find that out until I was 30 years old, and I found myself in Alcoholics Anonymous. So jumping forward a little bit, I'll just say this. I was the type of guy that in high school that I drank. I was the guy in the middle of a party, passed out drunk at 9 o'clock at night, and everybody's, drawing things on my face, right? That's the kind of drinker I was. I was just full speed. And then the older I got, the more consequences there were. I ended up, start finding myself getting thrown into jail, losing jobs, losing relationships, things like that. And just, time and time again, I would find myself with this pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, and I'd wake up in the morning and I'd look at myself in the mirror and I'd wonder, what the hell's wrong with me? And I'd want to stop, and I would swear I'm going to stop. I'm going to control it. I'm going to fix it. And it started around the time I was 20, and probably between the time I was 20 and the time I was 30, I tried a dozen, maybe a couple dozen times to try and control and fix this on my own. And, the longest time I was ever able to do it on my own, I remember I was about 21 years old. I was living with a girlfriend, and she kicked me out because of some things that happened directly related to alcohol. And I got it in my head, I'm going to prove to her she made the biggest mistake of her life. And I stopped drinking, and I stopped smoking weed and I started working out every day. And I was, things started to actually get better when I took that stuff away. And I made it 60 days on my own, just white knuckling it. And I know it was 60 days because it was October 20th that she kicked me out. And on December 20th, it was my birthday. And I remember thinking, I've gone 2 months. I've been able to manage this. I'm going to go out tonight. I'm going to have a good time with my friends. And then tomorrow I can pick up right where I left off because I've proven to myself that I can control this. And I went out that night and I had a good time, and I woke up the next morning and the first thing I thought was, it's only 5 days till Christmas. So I'm just going to hang out with my friends and enjoy the holiday spirit, right? And then after Christmas, I'm thinking it's only a week until New Year's. So what I'll do is I'll party until New Year's, and then I'll make a New Year's resolution, and I'm going to, then I'm going to get back to where I was at. And New Year's rolled around, and then the Super Bowl rolled around, and Valentine's Day and Flag Day, and then many, 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 many days passed since then before I finally took another sober breath, and that's how it was. I would always make a firm resolution that I was going to fix it. It would work for a little while, and then I'd go back, and then it eventually would get worse. And that happened about, a couple dozen times. And then eventually I found myself 30 years old, living at my parents' house, sleeping on the couch. My cell phone shut off because I can't pay the bill. My bank account's overdrafted. I can't hold a job. All the external symptoms of somebody whose life is unmanageable. And all that stuff wasn't enough to get me into Alcoholics Anonymous. What happened is I started waking up, and the first thought I had every day is, I hate my life. And I would go through every single day just that recurring voice in my head of, I hate my life. I hate my life. I can't do this anymore, And I don't want to say I was suicidal because I never actually attempted to take my own life, but I couldn't imagine living the same way. I couldn't imagine continuing my life living the way that I was living. And I was ready to throw in the towel. I was 30 years old. I was ready to throw in the towel. And so what I did is I got this brilliant idea that I'm going to go to a doctor and tell the doctor that I'm suicidal, and they're going to prescribe me some kind of medication that's going to make me feel better, right? Some kind of Zoloft or Xanax or whatever they give to Mike Tyson to keep him from biting people's ears off. Like, give me some of that because I need something to help me feel better. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor started asking me some questions. And for whatever reason, call it God working in my life, I just answered the questions truthfully when she asked me if I drank, if I used drugs, what I was doing, how often, those kinds of things. And they said, we can't diagnose you with depression if you're taking depressive substances, right? So they said, we'll make you a deal. Why don't you go into this program for 30 days and, 8 weeks. It was 8 weeks. If you go in this program for 8 weeks and you stay clean and sober, at the end of 8 weeks, if you still feel the way that you feel, then we can diagnose you with depression and talk about medication. And I decided, I had nothing left to lose. And so I went into that program. It was an outpatient program. And, I was completely against going to any kind of program, any kind of AA or MA or NA or anything like that. It was, my dad had gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he ended up relapsing a number of times. And I didn't think AA could offer me anything. And so what I did is I went to that program, and I was there, and I remember being in there for about 3 weeks, completely, dry. And I was more crazy. I was more angry. I was getting into fights with people at work. My life got worse without alcohol and drugs in my life. And the people there noticed it. And there was actually people in that group whose lives weren't getting worse. They were getting better. And so they suggested, why don't you try going to a meeting? And, I was against it, but I wanted to get them off my back. So I decided, fine, I'll go to a meeting. And so I took a recommendation from somebody to go to this meeting at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning in this town called Danville. And this is a town that's like a really rich white community. And my thought was, there's not going to be a lot of drunks in Danville. It's 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I'll go there. There'll be nobody there. I'll say that I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and then I'll say it didn't work, and then they'll get off my back. And I showed up at this meeting. It's a men's meeting, and there's about 120 guys in this church at 7 a.m. on a Saturday meeting, which was amazing. Like, I couldn't believe it because I hadn't been awake at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning in 15 years. And these guys were laughing and joking and drinking coffee, and they welcomed me into the meeting, and they said, you never have to go back to the way that you were living. They said, if you do what we do, go where we go, follow these steps, get a sponsor, your life can change. And I sat in the meeting, and I listened, and I raised my hand when they asked if anybody was new. And They asked me if I had a sponsor, and I said no. So a guy came up to me after the meeting, and he said, I'll be your sponsor. And I don't know what happened, but I left that meeting, and for the first time in my whole life, I left with a sense of hope. I left with a sense of like, maybe this thing can work for me, right? And the guy got me a big book that day, and he said, you know, read the first 164 pages and come back next week, and we're going to start working the steps. And so I got into action pretty quickly. I read the book, I highlighted it, I started working with my sponsor. I got involved in a home group, my home group, which is Thursday Night Men's Nursery Group number 3 in Alamo, California, with a bunch of guys that are active in Alcoholics Anonymous and actively doing service and actively trying to help new people and active in H&I. And I just fell into this group by the grace of God that just kind of pushed me. And I just followed the directions of these guys. And, you know, I never forget, one of the things that happened to me early on is I was still in that program. I had graduated the 8 weeks, but I had gone to like an aftercare kind of thing. And I showed up every week, and these people were just, a lot of these people weren't going to meetings or doing anything, and they were just miserable. And I was going to AA like 4 or 5 times a week, and I was getting, you know, I was feeling it. I was on a pink cloud. I was feeling the fire and the juice of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop going to this aftercare program and just keep going to more AA meetings, because that's where I'm getting what I need. And somebody at my home group pulled me aside and said, you know, Rocky, I heard what you were saying. Why don't you think about it like this? Instead of thinking about, you know, leaving there and coming here to get what you need, why don't you think about what you can take from Alcoholics Anonymous and bring to those people, because they clearly need it. And that just blew my mind, right? Because I don't think like that. I don't know about you guys, but my mind doesn't think about other people. My mind is all about me and what I think I need and what I want and what's in it for me. And so, you know, I took that guy's direction. I went back to that aftercare program, and I didn't go there and preach and tell anybody what they had to do or what, you know, all I did was share my experience of what I was doing in Alcoholics Anonymous and what it was doing for me. And I'll never forget, because after the end of that aftercare program, when I finally left, the last night we went around the room, and I had like 25 people that night thank me for being a part of their lives and thank me for being an inspiration or being, you know, an example of Alcoholics Anonymous for them. And that, you know, I couldn't get out of bed without thinking that I'd rather be dead than be alive 6 months before that. And here I had people telling me I was some kind of inspiration. And that wasn't me. That was God. That was Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. But I'll never forget that feeling I had that night driving home, because it was like I was Joe Montana, you know. It was like I hit the game-winning home run, you know. And that's what I wanted my whole life, that I could never get from a bottle. I could never get from a pipe. And Alcoholics Anonymous and taking direction and a God of my own understanding doing that for me, that's the only way I was able to have that feeling, you know. And my life has completely changed because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I sit here today, almost 8 years later. I'm married. I have a beautiful baby daughter. You know, I have a job. My bills are paid. My cell phone works. My bank account's in good standing. The IRS isn't coming after me for money that I don't have. You know, my life is completely, all the external things, my life is completely flipped upside down, you know. But the real deal of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life is I haven't had the thought that I need to put something in my body to change the way that I feel in a long, long time, you know. And today that's crazy, right? Because, you know, everybody's going through something right now with this COVID-19 and the shelter in place, but I'll just give you a little hint of what's going on in my life. You know, in California, in the Bay Area, we got put on shelter in place on March 17th. On March 23rd, my dad passed away from a heart attack, suddenly, unexpectedly. On March 24th, the next day, I found out that my company was shutting down and furloughing all their employees. This past week, I found out that my mom's got uterine cancer and needs to have a hysterectomy. In addition to a number of other things that's going on, right? And I'm not sitting here to say poor me or anything like that. The reality is the fact that the thought of taking a drink or putting something in my body to change the way that I feel during this time in my life, and what's undoubtedly the most hardest period of my life, is a miracle, right? And it's a miracle that only happened because of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to get some therapists off my back, and I was shown a way of life that introduced me to a God of my own understanding that changed my life completely, right? it's given me a life. It's given me back, you know, relationships with people that I thought I had lost. And it's given me a way of life where there's nothing that can happen that will change the fact that I know I can make it through anything if I take these steps, if I practice these principles in my life. But I need to do the work, you know, and that's why when my wife last night was texting with somebody and they were looking for a speaker for this meeting, she asked if I would do it. You know, the first thought that comes to my mind is not absolutely, I'd love to, but the first thing that comes out of my mouth is absolutely, tell me when, you know. I have to keep trying as hard as I can to be of service to anyone in Alcoholics Anonymous, any outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, in order for me to stay sane and to stay sober, you know. And you know, I'm just grateful to have the life that I have today. I'm grateful for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and groups like this where people can come and get together and share, because, you know, the first line of our tradition says it all. You know, it's a we program, not a me program, and our personal recovery depends on our unity. And it's been amazing to see how Alcoholics Anonymous has maintained that unity through this last 5-6 weeks where everybody's been locked up at home.